Good afternoon, colleagues.
Good afternoon, Christine. Can you?
Hi, Christine. Hi, Favor.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Luisa, do you hear me?
Hi, Jorge. Yes, I can hear you. How are you?
Nice.
How is everyone?
Perfect. Hi, Favor. How are you doing?
Okay. Hi, I'm fine.
Nice to hear that.
Hi, Maria.
Not working.
Hi, Luisa.
Hi, Luisa.
Hi, Favor. I see we are missing Jacqueline.
Yeah, she's the only one who's not here.
Let me try and prompt her.
Okay.
Do you hear too much noise on my side?
No.
No,
Yes.
Okay, because I am in a co-working space. Sometimes people discuss and talk and work.
Oh, there's Jackie.
Hello, Jackie. Hello, Maria. Nice to meet you. Yesterday,
Jorge.
I wasn't able to discuss with you.
Hi, Jackie. Karibu.
Hello?
Hi, colleague. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Yes,
I
we
can
can.
hear you.
But my volume is so low on my end. I don't know what's happening.
It's a bit hollow.
I'm trying with the, let me try the Bluetooth speaker.
Mm.
Mm.
Am I audible now? Just confirming my speakers are working.
Yes, Christine. Hello.
Thank
You
you.
at least I can hear you.
Thank you. I was a bit worried for a moment. I couldn't hear Maria very well, but now I can hear you.
Okay. I
Can you
hope
hear me?
everyone's audio is now fine. We are about to go live in the next 20 seconds.
I
20.
can hear everyone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm in
Louisa,
a
Once
very
Lu-
rainy place, so in the event of anything, I'm in a
Louis,
rainy
oh,
place,
mm,
but
okay.
I've tried to
Louisa,
use my earphones.
when
Lisa,
we are projecting our presentations, do we have to be on video as well to save on bandwidth, or we can turn off the video once we start sharing the?
If the bandwidth is bad, you can turn off the video, but if it's okay, you can leave it open. It's okay.
Because I'm tethering. I'm not so sure about my Wi-Fi.
Oh, okay. Then if it will be problematic, I think you can just switch from either.
All right, thanks.
Okay.
Luisa, once we go live, I will give 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and then I will start.
Okay, that's fine. We are letting people in now.
Okay,
So we'll
cool.
give them time to get in and then we'll begin.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Just double checking that sounds and visuals are working fine. Great, great. So, well, it's a pleasure to have such big number of people. I see 96 participants now, which is absolutely great. And for this second webinar after the inception webinar, in partner with UNESCO, the East African office, UNESCO headquarters, and the Lawyers Hub. The inception webinar was entitled Breaking Barriers, Navigating Gender Rights in the Judiciary in the Artificial Intelligence Era. Then this took place in March, right after the Day of a Woman in the Judiciary. Then in April, almost a little bit more than 1 month ago, we held the first webinar of this series after the inception webinar, which was entitled Gender Perspectives on Artificial Intelligence and the Rule of Law. After this first webinar, once again, after the inception webinar, we came, or the panelists, and of course, the work that continued after between UNESCO East Africa Office and the Lawyers Hub, we condensed a short list of 5 recommendations, which are the following. First, structural changes at the national, regional, and continental level, considering robust and gender-sensitive policy framework to foster behavioral, cultural, and societal norms changes towards gender inclusiveness, reduce gender bias, and mitigate their consequence. Second, advocate for equal access to resources, education, especially in STEM disciplines, capacity building for women in legal tech, and research on artificial intelligence and gender issues. Third, when addressing gender bias in artificial intelligence algorithms, consider mitigating not only the technical bias related to the data and the technology itself, but also the implicit bias from designers, developers, and other humans participating in the technology development, as well as cultural and societal bias, taking into account diverse cultures, needs, perspective, and experience. This takes special value when we think in the African context. Same as the first one, who is looking for structural or environmental changes towards inclusiveness of gender. 4, aim for achieving gender inclusivity at least at 3 levels: technical level, community level, and the user level. And 5th and last, keep fostering the development of dialogues like this series of webinars to raise awareness about artificial intelligence bias issues and their consequences in the legal sector in Africa, and to elevate the discussion on the topic. And this 5th recommendation brings me down to the initial discussion on brainstorming we held with UNESCO headquarters and UNESCO East Africa office, and of course the Lawyers Hub, the host, and trying to understand how this is impacting women in the judiciary in the African context. And instead of trying to follow an approach that will trace a roadmap or rigid lines on the discussion, we decided to follow an approach where we can have an exploration to better understand from the voices of women in the judiciary, women in tech, and in the intersection, women and legal and tech, what are their needs, what are their fears, what are their problems. And this is why here we are in the second webinar after the inception webinar, and today entitled breaking barriers, navigating gender rights in African legal landscape. So without the further discussion or presentation, I would like to leave the floor to the moderator, Madame Maria Beneca, who is the council member of the Commonwealth Lawyers Association. So please, Maria, the floor is yours, and I'm looking forward to keep listening and participating in this series of webinars to learn from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jorge. And thank you for that wonderful introduction to this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, I see we are right on time, and allow me to introduce you to our wonderful panelists. We have an all-female panel, really cool. And I'd like to welcome my panelists today. We have Christine, Jackie, Favor, and I'm trying to see everybody else. If you could please put on your screen. And Miss Dube. That's what we agreed that we'll call her, because her first name is very difficult to pronounce, but I think it's Lengiwe. But there's a bit of an accent there that you have to put in when you're starting her name. So I'd like to briefly introduce my panelists, if you'll allow me, in no particular order. I'll start with Christine. Christine is joining us today to talk about our lovely topic, navigating gender rights and African legal landscapes. She works for the UN Women. Christine is a dedicated human rights lawyer. She's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, and her passion lies in promoting gender equality, advocating for human rights, and ensuring access to justice. She's joining us here, talking about this topic because she has a particular interest in an area that she works in, that is ending violence against women and girls at the UN here in Kenya. And she's also responsible for leading the design and implementation of the UN Women's Strategy and programs on removing barriers to women's access to justice in Kenya. So, a full profile there for one of our panelists. Welcome, Christine. Our other panelist is Favor. Favor Borokoni is a lawyer and digital rights researcher. Favor is currently at, one second, I want to make sure I get this right. She's currently a Horizon Center for Doctoral Training, PGR student with the University of Nottingham School of Law. And she's conducting interdisciplinary research on Afrofeminist ethics and concerns in the design and use of avatars. And she holds an LLB. She's also a lawyer from the University of Benin. And she has been a barrister and solicitor of the Supreme Court of Nigeria since 2019. Before beginning her PhD, Favor worked with various organizations on technology and policy, and the impact of subsisting and emerging technologies on human rights, with a specific focus on women's rights and the Global South. So, looking forward to her contribution here today. The third panelist is Ms. Jacqueline Ngutia. Jacqueline Ngutia is a lawyer here in Kenya, and she is also a member of the Judicial Service Commission of Kenya, where she's a commissioner representing lawyers. She has over 10 years experience in working on women's rights, and also works at the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. Jacqueline holds a BA degree in law and a master's in peace and reconciliation studies. She's received training in strategic litigation on women land rights in Africa, mediation, trial advocacy, and she takes a human rights-based approach to development. So looking forward also to her presentation today. Now, last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, we have Lengiwe Dube. As you can tell from her name, Lengiwe is from the south, that is South Africa, and she's a human rights expert with experience on African human rights system, specifically related to development. She's interested in social justice and development, and her PhD research focuses on rights-based approaches to strengthening corporate accountability in the extractive sector in Africa, particularly on how states undertake to eliminate exploitation by international monopolies. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, we have a very well-informed panel, and we're going to take it away. What the structure of this panel will be is that we will give 10 minutes to each presenter, so that then after each presenter makes their presentation, followed by, I'll do a brief a Q&A as they do their presentation, and then we will have a panel discussion for another 10 minutes, and then a Q&A followed by the closing remarks. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Christine Okeno. Christine will be talking about, she's going to do her presentation, and then we can have a few questions for her after her presentation. Christine.
Thank you so much, my senior, Ms. Maria Mbeneka. It's a pleasure to be here. And since I have only 10 minutes and I don't want to be penalized or cut off, I'll go straight to my presentation. Allow me to share my screen. Let me get a thumbs up once you can see the presentation on the screen. Okay. Thank you. I see the thumbs coming. Is it on slide show mode, kindly?
No, not yet. It's not yet on slide.
Okay. You know how to... There?
Yes, you may proceed
Okay.
now.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll be sharing on this topic on the legal frameworks for gender equality in Africa, informed by our work at UN Women in terms of enhancing gender equality and access to justice through legislative reforms. I'll try to be as quick as I can and cover as much as I can. I look forward to the interactions in the plenary as well. That is just the structure of my presentation. You'll see it there. I'll try to be very brief. In terms of key global frameworks that underpin issues of equality and non-discrimination, I will largely focus on two, but just to mention others, give honorable mention. Globally, we are guided by the CEDAW, which is the global accepted standard or normative framework governing promotion of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. It was adopted in 1979. I'm sure all of us, or rather most of us, should be aware of this framework. The others are mentioned there in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the same Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. And of interest to us is the protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the rights of women in Africa, which we call the Maputo Protocol. That's the common name that we have for it. I'll also look at other relevant frameworks, what we call the soft law, not really treaty, but they provide standards and guidance on key principles that countries aspire to adhere by or follow in terms of promoting equality and gender equality in Africa. You see all of them are there, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, especially SDG 5 on gender equality and the empowerment of women, the African Union Agenda 2063, the Beijing Platform and Declaration Platform for Action, which we are gearing up to celebrate the 30th anniversary next year, the Continental Policy Framework on Sexual and Reproductive Health Rights, and the AU Strategy for Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment. All those are some of the key frameworks that guide us in terms of countries in Africa. And just to mention that while we do have these very comprehensive frameworks, 10 minutes not enough to go into the particular provisions of those frameworks. we still do have challenges in terms of achieving or realizing gender equality and non-discrimination, particularly for women and girls. And part of women's work in the continent has been through supporting legislative reforms and bringing together a forum that brought together countries from the East and Southern Africa to look at the legal landscape in terms of the discriminatory laws that are affecting women and girls. Some of the key challenges that were noted there in this forum was last year. You can see that cut across the many African countries that were represented therein is that there still exist colonial legacy laws in our statutes, despite those laws having been reversed in the countries of origin, which is a very sad state of affairs. I'd want to give maybe, for instance, an example of Kenya, that before 2013, we did have Married Women's Property Act of 1879. You can imagine still using a colonial law in the 21st century before we got our Matrimonial Property Act in 2013. So such kind of statutes, of course, no longer serve their purpose and also are against the principles of equality and non-discrimination. There's still persistent negative cultural norms and practices that are perpetuating inequality and hinder effective implementation of gender equality laws. This cuts across most African countries. Another challenge that was mentioned is in terms of weak institutional capacity, that yes, in certain instances, we do have equality provisions and non-discrimination in laws and in constitutions and statutes. But in terms of implementing them, we know that laws do not action themselves, they don't implement themselves. So in terms of implementation, it becomes impossible, inadequate because of maybe improper lack of infrastructure, resources, personnel that are supposed to take forth these laws or implement these laws are not well trained on gender equality or gender responsiveness in as much as we would like. Also, the issue of inadequate funding for gender-related programs hinder implementation. This also cut across. Gender is not prioritized in most countries. We will see other programs and agendas given priority, but gender takes the backseat, and this also permeates right to the devolved structures that we've seen the county government as it were in Kenya. And most of all is still the existence of discriminatory laws that yes, we do have those very progressive provisions in the global and framework in the global level, at the continental level as well, but we still have discriminatory laws. And where the laws are not discriminatory, for instance, there's still legal gaps and loopholes, and in certain instances, ambiguities that allow for discriminatory practices or in the interpretation of these laws. And this, for instance, for Kenya is still a very sad state of affairs because by virtue of our Article 2.5 and 2.6 of the Constitution of Kenya, the legal, the treaties, the global treaties and conventions that Kenya is a party to or are assented to automatically form part of our laws, our constitution. But still, despite all those progressiveness, we still do have existing discriminatory laws and gaps in our laws, in our statutes, as it were. So allow me to quickly just take you through the work that we do in terms of assessing discriminatory laws in Africa and our findings. This was a study that was undertaken by UN Women through our equality law strategy, UN Women and other partners, key being the International Development Law Organization, IDLO. They are here in Kenya in 2019, and that it focuses on the repeal or revision of discriminatory laws in terms of achieving a broader legal reform agenda to support the achievement of gender equality. And of course, this is just the aim, or what we aspire to do is in terms of legal reform is to repeal discriminatory laws in 100 countries and thereby address the legal needs of about 50 million women and girls globally. So it is this our research in terms of Kenya, the country, is part of this global strategy called Equality in Law Strategy. And the study for Kenya was conducted in between 2020, 2021, but updated last year in 2023 and undertaken collaboratively with IDLO and also with the support of the Kenya Law Reform Commission. This is just the broad objective of the legal assessment. You can see there, we are aiming to identify and analyze gaps and provisions in laws that are discriminatory towards women and girls or that lead to discriminatory outcomes in their interpretation, highlight what the challenges that undermine effective implementation of laws, and then what solutions are being proposed in terms of the identified gaps in the legal reform agenda. So this is just the methodology. Allow me to skip that on how the study was done, but just in terms of key findings, just to highlight that yes, Kenya has largely a robust constitutional, policy, and legal framework that is meant to empower women and girls and remove barriers that women and girls face. But however, this legal framework has failed or proved inadequate to fully protect women and girls and to realize their rights. Largely, this is due to the inability to implement the existing provisions. Of course, the issue of culture, we've seen the challenges in other countries as well, and gender stereotypes that still discriminate against women and girls. And all this has hindered the substantive enjoyment of the laws and freedoms by women and girls in equal standing with men and boys in the country. So in terms of just the legal provisions that were found to be discriminatory, you can see there that we still have sadly laws that are explicitly discriminatory. And while the courts have really tried, and also I think a big kudos to the CSOs and the women rights organizations that have been doing strategic litigation and bringing this attention of the court in terms of discriminatory practices, that despite having been challenged in courts, they still remain in statute. Some of them still remain in statute and are yet to be repealed. And therefore, the finding was that 9 laws must be repealed or in whole or in part. We have 17 laws that were identified that need to be revised or amended, and new laws enacted in 7 thematic areas in order to bring Kenya's legal framework in line with the institutional and regional obligations. And so therefore, there are the recommendations in terms of existing legal gaps that they should be addressed in terms of enactment of laws. We've identified some there, like the reproductive health. But besides the law reform, critical is the policy and program actions that have been recommended to ensure full implementation of those laws, to ensure comprehensive enjoyment of rights, and also to influence in terms of the downstream work, social and behavior change at the community level, and do away with retrogressive cultural practices that will hinder the implementation of those laws. So it's a 3-pronged approach in terms of legal reforms, policy and programs and capacity, and the downstream working with communities in the reform of laws. I don't know if I have enough time to just go through, but allow me to just have a summary of some of the findings in the thematic areas, one being marriage and family. You can see that quickly. I will share this presentation with the organizers, can be shared with all of us for detailed analysis. But you can see provisions that have been identified as discriminatory, including in our constitution, that that despite of providing for equality or equal protection in law, and our Article 27 qualifies this application to certain categories of people, being the persons that profess the Muslim faith, as pertains to issues of marriage, divorce, and inheritance. They have that qualification in terms of equality, and therefore we have the kind of recommendations under those provisions. We can see, for instance, in terms of the Marriage Act, recommendations to amend the Marriage Act to discourage polygamy, and for those unions that are already polygamous, to ensure enough protection for them in line with the Mosquito Protocol provisions. The next slide is on sexual and gender-based violence. Quite a number of laws that have been identified as discriminatory. The Sexual Offences Act currently does not include the crime of marital rape. We do have section 45.3 that includes the application of the law itself to married people. That is in terms that is presumed that no rape can happen within the context of marriage. And you see the other recommendations there in terms of the FGM, for instance, and also section 34 of the Sexual Offences Act in terms of permitting evidence of a survivor's sexual history, the kind of provisions that are discriminatory. Domestic violence, a bit more straightforward. Again, we see the issue of marital rape being proposed therein, but also in terms of amending the Act and the Victim Protection Act, we include provisions that protect survivors, including the establishment of state-run shelters. We still have a huge challenge with shelters and the operating procedures to manage them, as it were. Issues of violence against women in elections. We saw Kenya has been having quite an issue in terms of violence against women in politics and in elections. So quite a number of provisions have been noted to not fully protect women. Section 11 of the Election Offences Act proposed to broaden its scope to define VAWI, allow me to call it VAWI in short, in various forms, but also to amend both the Sexual Offences Act and the Election Act provide for a definition of all electoral-related sexual violence, and treat it as a unique manifestation of sexual violence that requires special investigation and prosecution. SRHR issues, we still lack law governing issues that regulate or govern assisted reproduction. There will be several attempts, but still nothing yet. And then also there's need for a comprehensive health law to comprehensively address reproductive health rights of all persons, including vulnerable groups, but also issues of criminalization of abortion still in our penal code. Despite our constitution permitting abortion in certain circumstances, we still have laws that are still existing in the penal code that criminalize this. So this should be amended to align with the constitution. Succession and inheritance, our law still is discriminatory. It still allows Muslims to exclude Muslims from its protection provisions and doesn't apply to all of them. We still have sections of the country by virtue of Article 32, or rather Sections 32, 33, 34, that don't enjoy the provisions of the Law Succession Act, and the law does not apply to all based on their geographical location. And therefore, the law says, the Act says that the customary practices of those regions can apply in terms of succession matters, of course, resulting to discriminatory outcomes. And of course, there's the issue of a widow losing their life interest if they remarry, in property they remarry, very discriminatory. The same does not apply to the male, the widowers. And then also issue of widows in polygamous marriage are not being held in the same standing, or rather being counted as one of the issues of the children in terms of succession matters. It's also occasionally discriminatory, discrimination against women. In terms of politics, a lot of work has gone herein, and we know that the issue of the two-thirds gender rule, we know that currently there's a framework being proposed, but it's still not realized. So in terms of recommendations to fully realize that and fast-track enactment of the Special Interest Amendment Bill as well, and also keep in mind the legal reform on violence against women in elections to ensure women's participation is recognized. Of course, labor and employment, we need a recognition of domestic care work and provide recognition and compensation for the same. We are not doing very bad on maternity, but still not in line with the minimum requirements per the ILO recommendation. So we need to bring that in order. And lastly, in terms of nationalities, not much, but just to enforce it in line with the CEDAW concluding recommendation observations in terms of refugee and stateless women married to Kenyan nationals being granted citizenship. I think that's just in summary. I'll try to really rush Chair, but I'm looking forward to sharing this presentation and for people can interact and maybe get further questions on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christine. I know you were rushed, and I could see even a comment from one of our participants, but don't worry about it. We're going to have a panel discussion where I'll give you an opportunity to delve deeper into your presentation. So the next presenter is Ms. Jacqueline Ngutia. Commissioner, we want you to go through your presentation, remembering that you'll have a panel discussion. I will ask you, about three or four areas of your presentation. So take it away.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have tried to share my screen. I hope you can see it. Maria?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Yes. My presentation will be on navigating legal challenges, strategies, and case studies, and I'll focus not just in Kenya, but also other African countries. Sadly, I'll not go to the Portuguese speaking. I'll strictly, more of my examples will be in the Anglophone and Francophone countries. So the presentation outline is as follows. So I'll speak about the common legal challenges faced by women in Africa. Some of these challenges have been highlighted by Christine, the strategies that have been applied across Africa, and I'll share certain case studies. And lastly, challenges and opportunities of using litigation to advance women's rights. One of the common challenge which Christine has highlighted, please don't read the screen word for word. It's just made to help you prepare, especially when I'm reading out the case studies that are highlighted. A key challenge is the colonial legacies and legal pluralism. We all know most African countries were colonized, and we were able to then adopt civil or common law history depending on our colonial legacy. And these laws had to then interact with our existing customary laws and religious laws, majorly Christianity and Muslim. So you see in most of the common law countries, customary law would then be relegated as inferior or would be regarded as repugnant to justice. And you would see certain rights that women enjoyed. And I would speak in the context of land and property. When land and property was communally owned, women had the right to use, occupy land. But when you had the privatization of land, we had women then losing out these rights. So the other aspect on personal law, where there is a conflict when it comes to legal pluralism, issues of marriage, we have different countries allowing different forms of marriage. In Kenya, we have the Christian, civil, customary, and Islamic marriages. So at times they do clash, and that has presented a problem for women, especially on the issues around matrimonial property or succession and inheritance. So legal pluralism and colonial legacies are a big challenge when it comes to implementation of women land rights. And you also need to remember that during colonial eras, you were able to adopt laws that were we adopted laws that were not custom made for Kenyans, and after independence, persons who were in a position of enacting laws majorly were male, and they were also not able to enact gender responsive legislation. The other challenge is discriminatory laws. Across Africa, we still have constitutions that have the clawback clauses that allow the application of personal law in personal matters, that is issues of marriage, inheritance, matrimonial property, and among these countries, Gambia, Kenya, we had that, but we were able to address the issue after 2010. Other countries such as Niger, they do allow marriage of young girls at age 16. We have codes, the family code in the civil jurisdiction, that's Djibouti, Gabon, Mali, Sudan, where we have law highlighting that men are the heads of families, so women are expected to obey their husbands. So this then affects women's choice when it comes to seeking justice. We also have proper laws. Again, going back to our colonial history, we needed to enact laws that fit our jurisdiction, fit for purpose legislation, but we didn't do that. So there are countries that don't have laws that govern protection of women's rights. And in countries where we have existing laws, those laws are not properly implemented. For example, in Ethiopia, polygamy is illegal, yet we see the same is practiced. There was a recent research that showed 11% of married women in Ethiopia are in polygamous marriages. Christine also mentioned issues around unfair labor practices. It's very common to see women lose their jobs when they get pregnant, when they suffer certain forms of disability. So we still have discriminatory practices, whereas certain constitutions, or we have laws enacted by Parliament that prohibit discrimination. Patriarchy and harmful social norms. Africa is a highly patriarchal society. So in as much as there are existing legal provisions that promote women land rights, and I would give an example on inheritance. I have been in court several times where you find daughters attending court stating that they are not interested in inheriting their father's estate because custom does not allow that. We also have practices such as FGM in a number of jurisdictions across Africa, whereas they have been, in certain countries, they have been criminalized, but in certain countries, they've not been criminalized, especially in the West African region. Lastly, we have unresponsive access to justice system. We all know to get to court, you require funds. There's the procedural technicalities. We have issues of adversarial nature of the courts, especially within the common law system. So we also have seen courts making not very friendly decisions, and I would give an example of a decision in Ghana. In Ghana, cohabitation is not recognized as a form of union that should be protected. And what the court then refer to this type of union is concubinage. So women are referred as concubines. And imagine when you refer to concubine in a court record, that I don't feel is, I consider that as very degrading. In Gambia, there is a Supreme Court decision of where there was a dispute between written law and personal law. The woman was married under a monogamous form of marriage, but later on, without the knowledge of the woman, the man contracted an Islamic marriage with another woman, and when the man died, the first wife moved to court saying she is the only wife, and hence was expected to inherit the estate. But the matter went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that in as much as the woman was married in a monogamous marriage, the man's personal law was Islamic, and was allowed then by law to take in a second wife, and that presented a problem because now the first wife had to then distribute the property with the second marriage. So the unpredictability of what the court would determine. And lastly, for those also in Kenya, the Sharia versus the Sharia court case that said a woman must show direct military contribution before she is awarded the division of matrimonial property. So this has been held after the 2010 Constitution as bad law. So in addition to the existing challenges women face in the informal justice system, we have seen women move to the informal justice system, the customer structures, churches or unions within the community. But we also need to be aware that some of these systems are used to then perpetuate human rights violations. So we've seen this patriarchal system being embedded in the customer structure, and again, when women seek services from this informal justice system, they're then likely to face different forms of discrimination. So what are some of the strategies that have been used to address the challenges? One, we have seen constitutional and legal reforms, especially post-democratization period. Most African countries started enacting new constitutions, and out of those constitutions, they were able to then enact laws that would then promote women land rights. South Africa, we have Nigeria, we have Kenya that have new constitution that provide for equality and they do not have the clawback clauses like other constitutions. In addition to the constitution, we also have laws that have been put in place in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. We have laws on gender equality that speak specifically on issues of gender equality. On access to justice, we have seen a huge number of courts established across countries. We've seen the recruitment of more judges, magistrates, and again, in the recruitment processes, we've seen more women in these offices. We've also seen national government setting up legal aid services. In Kenya, we have the National Legal Aid Service that offers legal aid services. We have the Law Society of Kenya, also an women are also being considered as elders when it comes to resolving the dispute. Another key thing is the ratification of international and international human rights standards. I don't want to speak on the exact provisions because Christine already mentioned that. So we have not only ratified but also verificated some of these provisions, and we have also seen the human rights bodies come up with general comments or issuing concluding observations to different countries that then promote women land rights. We also have the regional or international enforcement mechanism, like the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Sometimes back in the case of the Federal Ethiopia, the Commission held that by failing to investigate and taking action against persons who had raped and abducted a minor girl, then the government had failed to undertake its obligation as required under the Banjul Charter. That is with regards to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. And for the African Court on Human and People's Rights, there was a case that was brought against the Republic of Mali when the government had enacted legislation that was setting the minimum age of marriage at 16 for girls, 18 for boys. And again, the court held that that particular legislation, the African court held that that particular legislation was in violation of a series of Maputo Protocol articles. And lastly, again, this is a very famous case by the Committee on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women against the United Republic of Tanzania, where there's a number of customary practices in Tanzania that promote disinheritance of widows. Again, the committee established that Tanzania was in breach of a series of the CEDAW protocol. We've also had strategic litigation where a number of advocates have moved to court to enforce women land rights. And these have also ensured that we bring to fore issues of regional international human rights instruments. In Uganda, they do not have laws that, in Uganda, there was a case, sorry, I'm mixing up this particular case, there's another one coming up. So there was a case, Herbert Collier versus M. Collier, where the court made reference to international human rights in promoting widows' right to matrimonial property. Again, in Botswana, Musi and another, I can't see it's highlighted there. Sorry. So again, the court held that a customary practice that denied a woman's right to inherit her late husband's property violated the Constitution's right to provision and equality. And lastly, just giving the examples, is in Kenya, the Court of Appeal affirmed a trials court decision where a woman's dignity was violated during childbirth. So the court enforced the reproductive rights of a woman. Lastly, we've also had advocacy and awareness creation. We've seen organizations undertake open days, such as the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, the Law Society of Kenya, FIDA, we have the Kenyan Judiciary, and advocacy by association. At the national level, at the international level, we've had the LSK, the East African Law Society, Commonwealth Lawyers Association, constitutional commissions in Kenya. We have the Association of Women Judges. There is an institution based in South Africa called ISLA, and also a working group on SOA that is also housed by Equality Now. And we also have within the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, a group of litigators who then engage the commission's protective mandate. So my last presentation would be on challenges of using litigation. First is the cost. It's usually not very cheap because you have to engage in a lot of research just beyond the ordinary case that you would be handling. We also have inadequate subject matter expertise. And this one is majorly on the intersectionality of women rights. So you would find a petitioner not packaging a women's rights issue as it ought to be. So if it's an issue of reproductive right, there is a need to then look at the intersectionalities beyond the reproductive rights. And then we also have ideological differences between our judges. There are those who are textualists, there are those who are originalists, there are those who believe that the laws or the constitution is a living document. So that is a challenge, and that's why you'll find different decisions from different courts. Inordinate court delays, that is common, and enforceability of some of these decisions. There's been quite a number of disobedience of court orders. And lastly is client management, whereas we are looking at the greater public interest, but we always have to consider that it's a client that we are representing. So how to manage the clients, there's usually at times issues of media and the like. So client management is also a challenge that we need to be aware of. Lastly, opportunities for using litigation. One of it is we have available legal systems, especially within the common law countries by virtue of the doctrine of precedent. We also have a number of lawyers who've been trained to take up strategic litigation cases. And I know this has also been, this can be attributed to the training of lawyers in law school. So more lawyers are receiving trainings on this. And then it's also an ideal way of accelerating the advancement of women's rights. And we also have the available normative human rights standards and interpretive texts that would help us. Thank you so much. I beg to leave there.
Thank you. Thank you, Jackie, for that wonderful presentation. I know there's a time constraint, so let's try and keep time also so that we have a full panel discussion, which is also not very long, but we'll do our best. Our next speaker is Flavor. Flavor, I hope you're ready. You're going to be speaking to us on the role of technology in advancing gender rights, I believe. So take your 10 minutes and give us your presentation. Thank you.
You did. Thank you very much, Maria. I will now proceed to share my screen, which is for some. Okay, yeah.
I don't think we have your screen yet. It's coming on. It's coming on. If you can go into presentation mode. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So today I'm speaking about the role of technology in advancing gender rights. And I find the framing of technology as a tool to be very interesting because there are all sorts of ways in which we can frame technology. So there are some people, for instance, who frame technology as a force. This group are referred to as technology determinists. They believe technology to be a force, like a force of nature, something that drives change in society, that changes the course of history, that influences politics. And when we think about technologies like artificial intelligence today or electricity, or think about the way we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, we are talking about ways in which technology is currently radically changing the way we interact, the way we behave, the way politics and culture is being done and enjoyed and experienced. But the flaw with this kind of approach is that it sort of occludes the influence of people. It's people who create technologies. Technology is not nature. Technology doesn't come into being all by itself. People design these technologies, often irresponsibly, often recklessly, and this comes to impact people's lives and livelihoods. So that's why I find the framing of technology as a tool very interesting, because when you think about a tool, it's something that you use, it's something that you are hopefully in control of, something that you appropriate for a particular use case. This framing is not without its challenges, of course, because then you get people who say that when it comes to stuff like gun control, for instance, in the US, that it's not guns that kill, it's people who kill. But when you think about well, the context of what we are referring to, for instance, in the US, where there is a right to bear arms, and you think about how easy it is in many states in the US for people to walk into stores and purchase guns, and how acceptable it is, then it's no longer simply a problem of it's not guns that kill, it's people who do, because there's a context where it is more acceptable to carry, it is expected in some cases, it's a form of pride to do so. So when we think about technology, it's important, and technology as a tool, it's important to consider context, purpose, design, and values. And this applies to all sorts of technologies, clothing as well, even eating utensils, digital technologies, artificial intelligence. These are technologies that are designed in specific contexts for specific purposes, in specific ways, and bearing certain values in mind. So, and when it comes to technology and access to information and legal services for women and marginalized genders, I don't know why that went that way. So here are some interesting ways I think that technology can aid access to information and legal services for women and marginalized genders. So, well, I think today, the world today is quite a tumultuous one. There are all sorts of protests and movements all over the world, in Palestine, in Congo, in Senegal, in Nigeria, in South Africa, everywhere, all over the continent, all over the world. Events are happening, and in very many cases, protests and mobilization occurs because digital technologies enable people to take records. So there is an organization I'm aware of called Witness, and the work they do is empowering civil society and ordinary people to use mobile technologies to record injustice wherever it happens. So in the form of audio, in the form of pictures, in the form of video. So this is one way that technologies enable access to information and legal services. And I remember during the NSAS protests in Nigeria, there was a DJ at the time, and I believe she has successfully sought asylum in Canada as a result of our work, who live streamed the shootouts by the military that night on Instagram, and it was Instagram Live. And that was one way through which people all over Nigeria, all over the world who weren't there at the moment could view and experience what exactly was going on. And then, and so technologies enable consciousness building and mobilization and campaigning. They enable people to talk about their experiences. If you think about protests like Me Too, for instance, Black Lives Matter, and a host of others, these are movements that occurred because people on online platforms were able to powerfully share experiences that mattered, using hashtags, using words that were similar, and this built consciousness, and consciousness building resulted in mobilization. And then after these campaigns are done, after these movements have not come to an end, but after money has been given, for instance, in form of donations and aid, technologies will aid accountability. They enable organizations, civil society organizations, to disseminate their findings, to publicize results, to share how they have disbursed the funds that were given to them for the purpose of carrying out their work. And then also, and then when you think about case records, for instance, as somebody who studied law in Nigeria, I found it often very difficult to access certain cases because as a student at the time, I did not have access to certain legal records. So some of them were not available in our library, and I couldn't access the foreign ones as well because well, Nigerian African law students don't have access to these facilities. But with the aid of these are things that would radically improve if access were provided via technologies. And over the last couple of years, various service providers are now making it possible for lawyers and law students to access cases from local cases, international cases, from wherever they are. And then when it comes to emergency contacts, for instance, I remember a couple of years ago, a friend of mine was arrested in Nigeria for, she accused a man of rape, of sexually violating, and she was arrested for accusing somebody of rape. And I woke up to multiple phone calls from her friends, and they told me that my friend had been arrested. And then I reached out to FIDA, the International Federation of Women Lawyers in Ekiti, where I volunteered while I was during the National Youth Service. But I could only do that because they had because I had volunteered with them, and also because I had our president's number at the time. And also well, when it comes to I also reached out to a couple of lawyers, people I'd gone to law school with, on various WhatsApp groups, informing them, asking if there was anybody who could handle this case, who could provide legal representation for her. And this was only possible, of course, because I could only know about what had happened because her friends called me, and I could only reach out to her and provide aid with the aid of technology. And so this tallies also with my final point, which has to do with how to reach groups and populations in places where people are unable to, in further regions, so wherever we are. Technologies have made it possible for people to communicate directly and get help without needing to leave their homes. So when it comes to empowering women and girls, I put the word empowerment in quotes because sometimes the word is such an oblique word, I think, sometimes. But I define empowerment as self-actualization, giving people agency, autonomy, the authority to speak for themselves. And in very many ways, technology has empowered women and girls to pursue education and careers in various industries: entrepreneurship, agriculture, entertainment, healthcare. And technology aids civil society and law firms and ministries of justice, governments in delivering services and platforming own voices. People who, well, you don't necessarily need to have to register an NGO, for instance, today in order to have your own voice. You only need to register an account on social media to put out your views. That doesn't necessarily guarantee that anybody will see it, of course, because there's also the challenge of building a community, a platform, a network. But at least you can start from somewhere. So the challenges and limitations, I don't believe it's possible to talk about the role of technology in advancing gender justice without talking about the digital divide. The digital divide impacts it refers to the challenges that prevent people from meaningfully using and engaging with the internet. So, of course, it cuts down to things like mobile phones being expensive, internet subscription being expensive, there not being free Wi-Fi in public spaces, laptops being expensive, digital literacy. I was on a panel a few weeks ago, and one speaker who works in South Africa mentioned that it's one thing for you to go with your organization to an economically deprived area and mobilize a group of girls and bring them to the big city, and then put laptops in front of them, and then discover that these young girls are unable to actually use these devices because they haven't grown up with them, because their families are unable to afford them. So the digital divide is something that matters when it comes to even service delivery for organizations like FIDA, for instance, for civil society as well. It's hard, for instance, for people who need help to actually put a call across or to contact these organizations who can actually provide these services for them. And then there are also cultural limitations, like the earlier speakers have mentioned. While I was working with policy a few years ago, I was interviewing a lady for on a project exploring AI and African women, and she talked about how she had supported some projects for women in tech, and she said that sometimes the men in the lives of the women that she was working with would eventually discourage them from continuing with the program. So there are all these cultural limitations. And then we also have to consider digital and online safety, online gender-based violence, technology-facilitated violence in spaces like Uber, for instance, on social media. Women politicians are targeted due to their visibility. Diversity and inclusion is a big problem when it comes to the design of these technologies, because who are people building these technologies? It's a male-dominated space. Women are not fully represented in design. They receive very little funding, and so matters that matter to women don't get the center stage that they deserve and need. And then something equally important is that the presence of online advocacy might discourage people from doing offline advocacy in a very weird way, and that then impacts people who are unable to use digital services. And of course, surveillance, privacy, data protection risks, internet shutdowns, the way the states and the government, anti-democratic tendencies prevent vulnerable people from using technologies to access services, and it prevents service providers, legal service providers, from providing help and assistance to those in need. So the way forward, it's important for us to create an Afrofeminist context-led approach, which is what all of our speakers here today have spoken about. We need to think about the context. We need to think about what is the solution that matters for Uganda, for Nigeria, for Mali, for Niger. What do the women in these countries, in this context, need? And then we need to identify the stakeholder groups, designers, the people who are making laws, who are making technologies, and users, individuals, civil society, and law firms. They need to come together to speak about what it is that they need. And there needs to be representation and diversity in this conversation as well. And then there needs to be mentorship and championing of women who want to go into technology, who want to work in these spaces, need a lot of support, because a lot of this work is extremely taxing and demanding. And there needs to be investment in grassroots. So rather than outsourcing digital services, for instance, to international companies, relevant stakeholders need to invest in local talent in order to build better technologies. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Favor. Thank you for that lovely presentation. I'm sure everybody will agree with me that it was a good, very good presentation. Last but not least, we have a presentation by Lengiwe Dube. And I believe, Lengiwe, your presentation is going to talk, or is going to capture, best practices and future directions for advancing gender rights in Africa with digital inclusion. So as you do your presentation, please address us on those things. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible. My name is Hlengiwe Dube. I'm based at the Center for Human Rights here at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. I focus mostly on information rights, including the intersection between technology and human rights. And I'm finalizing my doctoral studies at the University of Pretoria, and I'm focusing on issues around state surveillance, looking at the nexus between human rights and public security issues. So I've been asked to also contribute to the conversation today. And I've been asked to look at best practices and future directions for advancing gender rights in Africa with digital inclusion in mind. And I'm going to respond to this issue by, I'm going to address it by responding to 4 questions, starting off with digital inclusion, how digital inclusion can be leveraged to address gender inequalities on the continent. So just you will notice that some of the issues have already been stated by our previous speaker. So I guess my job is to restate some of the issues that have already been raised. But if you're looking at digital inclusion, we see that it's something that is very impactful in terms of addressing gender inequalities in Africa, as we have heard from the previous presentation, some of the advantages that come with access to digital technologies for women, including access to information, education services, and also access to some of these other resources or platforms that were previously not reachable. And I think one of the important, points that are usually raised around, when you're talking about women is that of access to healthcare information, entrepreneurship, as we know that women are largely marginalized in the business sector, but access to technologies is now making it, easier getting information on legal rights. Now we see even the use of artificial intelligence to provide women with information on gender-based violence. And, having digital skills is also very important. I don't know what's happening to my screen.
Maybe just proceed as you try and get it back on.
Okay. I was talking about the importance of digital skills, and I was saying that in the context of digital inclusion, that's also something that we need to emphasize, particularly training programs and how they can equip women with the necessary competency, to thrive also in a digital economy. And it also helps in narrowing the gender gap in terms of employment, also getting income as well. And I'm sure you'll agree with me that digital platforms are being used by women to amplify their voices, advocating for their rights. The women's movement is thriving in digital platforms, and also giving women an opportunity to participate in decision-making processes, and also promoting thereby promoting social inclusion as well. I think it's back now.
Yeah.
But as I was looking at this, I wanted to just take note of the fact that women, a very diverse group, and just singling out women with disabilities, I thought I should just highlight this quotation by Judy, a disability rights activist, who said that for people without disabilities, technology makes things easier. But for persons with disabilities, technology makes things actually possible. And we can actually see the transformative nature of technology when it comes to persons with disabilities and women with disabilities. Now, those that can access, those that can afford, can, it can bring about changes, fundamental changes in their lives, and actually make things possible, whether it's communication, whether it's participating in the economy or in other spaces as well. So this
Anyway,
brings
your
me
screen
to
is
my
your screen is not loading. Maybe stop and then share as you continue.
maybe let me just present without sharing the screen. All right, so just a few examples of initiatives that are taking place across the continent on digital inclusion. I decided just to pick a few. In Kenya, I think colleagues can also assist in critiquing whether this has been a success. The Ajira digital program, which is designed to equip young people, including young women, with digital skills. And then in Rwanda, the Rwanda Digital Ambassadors program, which is also which trains women as digital ambassadors and promotes digital literacy. And then we've got the She Code Africa organization based in Nigeria, and is doing a great work when it comes to digital inclusion, when it comes to digital literacy. If you look at some of their initiatives, they have like a scholarship, laptop scholarship, which is then there's also the data scholarship, which is an initiative to ensure that women have equal access to the internet. There's financial scholarship. There is also the STEM initiative, which is designed to promote, the taking up of science subjects by girls and young women. Moving on to my next question, which I was supposed to respond to, which speaks to some of the biggest challenges hindering women's access to and use of technology on the continent. I just picked a few challenges, such as limited infrastructure and connectivity, particularly when you're looking at rural areas and other underserved communities. Cultural norms, those some of these values that we have in our societies that are retrogressive and discouraging women from pursuing education, particularly careers in the STEM fields. And all this reality perpetuates disparities in the tech sector, whether it's in the development of the technologies, in the use of the technologies, distribution and all that. So there's this imbalance that currently exists, this gender imbalance. And obviously digital literacy gaps, they exist among women, particularly those also in marginalized communities. And this undermines quite really their ability to effectively engage with technologies. As I've highlighted, there are many advantages that come with technology, but you need the certain level of literacy for you to be able to effectively use the technology at your disposal. And addressing these challenges would require multi-stakeholder approaches, would require investments, for example, in infrastructure, targeted training programs. You require the media to raise awareness. You also require some, for example, stakeholders like civil society organizations to challenge gender stereotypes or our codes as well. Come up with those initiatives that promote inclusivity in the tech industry. And just going back to some of the groups, like especially rural areas and underserved communities, you find that access to basic infrastructure such as electricity now is not only limited to rural areas. Load shedding, electricity is a big issue in Africa. Sometimes you spend a greater part of the day without electricity, and if you don't have electricity, it affects your access to using the internet or having your device working. And on the cost, just to highlight that technology may be accessible, but affordability is a significant barrier for many women in Africa, particularly those that are in the low income brackets, but also those with disabilities, because the devices that are used by persons with disabilities are very costly. So the cost of assistive devices is very prohibitive. If you look at persons that have visual impairments, for example, the kind of laptops which they use and the laptop that I can use, the cost is very different, and for theirs being on the very high side. And My third question I'm trying to rush is around the issue of public and private sector partnerships in promoting gender equality through digital inclusion. So these public-private partnerships are very important in advancing gender equality generally, but also within the digital inclusion context. And, we can make use of these partnerships or take advantage of these partnerships, capitalizing on the strengths of the private sector and also on the strengths of the private sector as well, or the available resources from both ends to maximize the interventions. And governments can actually create an enabling policy environment, because for all these initiatives to thrive, you need a very conducive environment, starting with the policy framework and the necessary structures in place. So you need a conducive environment to invest in, whether it's investing in digital infrastructure or it's implementing programs that have to do with bridging the digital divide for women. And specifically the private sector, they can, and some of them are already doing it, to develop gender-sensitive technologies and providing funding for initiatives that promote digital inclusion. There are a couple of examples that we can state here. And then also, one of the areas that the private sector can actually be involved in more, it is doing it, but they can, more could be done around the issue of mentorship for young people, including young women. I think based on the disparity, especially in the STEM sector, this is required. But in these private-public partnerships as well, I think it's also important to state that there's requirement for some of the foundational aspects like transparency, like accountability, and also the meaningful engagement of women in all the stages, whether it's design of these technologies, whether it's implementation, or any other area. We need that meaning, not just a ticking box kind of situation, but effective engagement or meaningful engagement of women in all stages. But it's just highlighting that it's very important to have these collaborative approaches, because both sectors, whether it's public or private, have strengths that we can capitalize on. Just to spotlight one of the initiatives that I've stated before, which is a public-private partnership, is the Ajira program in Kenya, which is designed to, it's driven by the Ministry of Information, Communications and Digital Economy, and is designed to provide digital skills to young people, including young women, facilitating also online work opportunities and training, promoting gender equality as well. I like the fact that it actually recognizes the importance of gender equality, and all this targeting of young people in the digital economy is very important in this day and age. And it is implemented through a multi-stakeholder approach, which is a collaboration between government agencies and the private sector, educational institutions, and some NGOs. So some of the key components include, skills training, online, providing a platform where young people can access online work opportunities, providing information on entrepreneurship, gender mainstreaming as well, to ensure the effective participation of women. And I'm sure the impact, although a lot still needs to be done, but that skills development is very important to highlight as one of the impacts, the job creation through the online work opportunities, in the gender equality, although we still have a long way to go, but some women can speak to having benefited. But whilst we are speaking of the strides, there are also challenges that are also encountered in the context of this example that I've highlighted, like, with the technology, you need to continuously invest the digital infrastructure. So there's the funding gap there around the continuous investment into the infrastructure, and ensuring that the sustainability of the program, and also in order to come up or implement strategies that are relevant, you need to engage in rigorous research, you need to engage in rigorous evaluation, and all those initiatives. So those are some of the challenges that are faced. My last issue, as I'm wrapping up, that I'm responding to, is on the what are the emerging trends and future directions.
Lengiwe, we can take that point in the Q&A, in the panel discussion, if you don't mind. I will specifically ask you about the emerging trends and the future.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much to Lengiwe for a fantastic presentation. I'm sorry I had to cut you short, but I will definitely give you an opportunity to address this particular point on emerging trends and the future. So now, ladies, could you put on your screens, because you're going to have a panel, Christine, Jacqueline, Favor, and Lengiwe, when we are going to talk about, I'm going to ask you a few questions. I'll also take some questions. You've seen there's quite a number of questions from our participants. I'll be adding on some of those questions to this panel discussion. But I really want to start with you, Christine. What would you say are the challenges in implementing and enforcing the legal frameworks that you discussed? You talked about, you gave us a background on the legal frameworks in Africa when it comes to gender equality. So for you, what are the challenges in implementing and in enforcing those legal frameworks across different African countries?
I believe this will be a repetition. Chair, I did mention, I think, some of those challenges. But just maybe for the sake of keeping the conversation going, a lot of it involves lack of political will. Where we have state parties to these treaties and conventions, they have made commitments at the regional or global levels, but these do not translate into their actual national statutes, right? So we do have those commitments made, but in terms of translating that into law, for certain countries, they do have to domesticate those into their national laws. But for the case of Kenya, I didn't mention that by virtue of Article 2.5 and 2.6 of the Constitution, we no longer have to go through a long domestication process. Once treaties are assented to, they become part and parcel of our laws and applicable in the country. But so I think largely with that lack of political will, and then also the issue of negative norms and cultural practices that also Senior Jacqueline mentioned, and the patriarchy, so that when, yes, the laws are there, but the existing conditions in the community are not conducive for them to be implemented for the benefit of those who they seek to protect. And just that also, for those who are implementing in terms of capacity, I did say that the laws don't implement themselves. So if we have insufficient capacity, or institutions that are tasked with implementation do not have the knowledge or the capacity to comprehensively implement those laws, but also the issues of bias are seeping into those people, the implementers. Jackie again did mention in terms of we look at the judicial decisions that are made by judges. Yes, the laws are there, they're providing for equality, but you find your own biases, your own experience seeping into those decisions, right? So such kind of things still affect achievement of equality and in law for women and girls all over Africa. I'll say this. Thank you.
And speaking speaking of bias, I just want you to briefly touch on the question of the third gender, because it's come up in our chat, and there's also, I think there are 2 or 3 questions about that. Somebody's asking about, how do you approach the third gender in the application of these legal frameworks? And also there's another specific question about, someone who's asking that she's curious to hear about gender. I think this is Charmaine. She's curious to hear about gender and sexual-based violence in the digital space. Something you think about revenge porn, or tech-facilitated gender-based violence. Are there currently any laws that provide for any of these things? And should they be advanced under the gender-related legal frameworks, or should they be advanced generally, not specifically under the gender approach?
Allow me to start with your second question, because it's what's at the top of my mind. Of course, I think lately we've seen an emerging trend of violence shifting to the online platforms, right? And the use of technology in terms of gender-based violence. So yes, it is a big issue, and I think the theme of TSW, I think last year, the Commission for Women was on technology for violence, and in terms of enhancing inclusion and protection of rights in the digital space. So it's a big current issue, an emerging issue, but currently several challenges are affecting the effective management of that space, right? We do see, for instance, the case of Kenya, are there laws? Yes, there are laws, but scattered all over, right? So in terms of consolidation, for instance, while we do have, we know if you're sexual offenses, we know where to get Sexual Offences Act, right? In terms of domestic violence, we have the Protection Against Domestic Violence Act separately, but when it comes to technology facilitated violence, we do have various little provisions in various laws. You have the Computer Misuse, I think, Act, Misuse and Cyber Crimes Act. We do have the Data Protection Act. We do have the Information and Communications Act. So little bit of provisions scattered all over various laws. Another issue is that the provisions are also not comprehensive, right? Given the nature and how fast technology changes and advances, the crimes or the violence, the type of violence also keeps changing, right, and morphing. So the law cannot keep up with this kind of development. So you find, for instance, I know the common offense is a misuse of a communication gadget. What is that? You know, it seems very vague, and I think it trivializes the effect of the gendered aspect of the violence and the effect that it has. We do have very serious issues of be it cyberbullying, be it pornography, issues like doxing and all those kind of things that are not even touched on by the law. And another issue also just awareness. Even as maybe a survivor of that tech violence, do you even know that a violation has been committed against you, for instance? Do you even know who do you report to? But even as you report to the people you're reporting to, are they even aware that what you're reporting is a violation? You know, they might trivialize it and say, sorry, I'm going back to my Kenyanese. What is it that you're reporting? What are you doing on Facebook or on Twitter? So how do you want me to help you?
So what you're saying is that, yes, so Christine, what you're saying is that the laws exist. They exist, but
with very many challenges.
And what about this specific question about whether they should be anchored in gender-related legal framework?
I would say yes, given that currently, I do know that there's a process that is currently looking into review of sexual offenses and other related laws. So I think it is actually a very good time. There's a whole committee that has been put in place to look into that in terms of reviewing. So it's actually, for me, I think, a very good time to consolidate all sexual and gender-based violence laws, be they in the physical space or in the tech space, right? So I think it would be a very good time to review those, amend them, and be sure that they are applicable and are answering to the current trend and the emerging issues. I think it's actually a very appropriate time to look into that possibility of having consolidated laws that address all these emerging issues in the tech space. I would say so.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask Jackie. Jacqueline, if I wanted you to address the issue of the third gender, building up on what Christine has just been talking about. We know the laws exist. We know now there's, Christine's opinion is that we should be looking at anchoring this under gender-related legal frameworks. And Charmaine is asking this in the background of tech-related or tech-related gender-based violence, revenge porn, which you've seen, but address us on the issue of the third gender, he, she, they, them, you know. This is something that we're living with now. Many people identify, you know, with a third gender. And what is your approach when it comes to, you know, your in your presentation when you were talking about the case law across Africa? Where would you place the third gender? Are we dealing with it in Africa? Has the time come for it, or are we still ignoring it?
Thank you for the question, Maria. With regards to the two-gender rule, I believe it's a very political issue. So unless we get a buy-in, legislation itself will not be sufficient. Because if you look at our constitution, it's clear in all appointive and elective positions. But we still have 14 years later after we got the constitution, you still have board appointments not adhering to the two-third gender rule. So for me, we still have to engage in advocacy. Litigation is good, but not the only tool which we can use. And this would then require that we engage with Parliament, at the same time, engage with the executive, but most importantly, the ground, that is the community members. There is this question that is put to the fore. How come, if, for example, in Kenya, we have more women voters than male voters, but we still end up voting in men? We also need to address the societal norms, the practices. When you're looking at the intersectionality, when you say it is okay for women to take up leadership position, but you've not prepared a level playing ground in terms of finances, addressing GBV during campaign. So there are so many issues. So when you're addressing the issue of two-third gender rule, we should not just focus on litigation. We have seen in Rwanda,
sorry,
there is progress.
Sorry to
Yes.
cut you short.
Yes.
I asked about the third gender, not
Oh,
the
okay. Okay. The third gender.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, okay. I think I even indicated here, I saw a question with regards to the third gender rule. So the third gender, maybe you could further contextualize it.
Yes. So the
understand.
context here is that we are talking about the gender as we know them, and like you rightly said, men, women. But now you have a group of people who identify as neither male nor female, and they'd rather be ambiguous about it. So they would refer to themselves as they, them.
Oh, okay. Now I get it. I get it. Sorry, I was thinking it's with regards to the two-third gender rule.
Yes.
I think by virtue of human being a human rights, as a human rights practitioner, is that certain rights must be realized. But the discussions around individual rights and societal norms, it's not in my place to discuss. I'll leave that for politicians. But for me, yes, it's a discussion that is necessary. But in Africa, I know it's a big discussion on whether we should promote, but our text, our legal texts, I would say gender neutral, majorly him, her. It will still requires a lot of discussions to get a buy-in. Are we there yet? Not so sure. Certain countries, yes, I know that with South Africa, the constitution prohibits discrimination based on many things, including sexual orientation. In other countries, I know Nigeria, Uganda, Ghana, the discussion is hot now. We have laws, Nigeria and Uganda, that prohibit issues around sexual orientation. So for me, I'm saying we will get there. Maybe not now, but we'll get there. But as a human rights practitioner, no one should be discriminated, or no one should face violence by virtue of their sexuality.
Okay. Now,
Yes.
let me take that to favor.
But oh, sorry, I've seen somebody mention about the issue of intersex.
Yes.
Intersex persons. As a country, we don't include them in the LGBTQ grouping. As a Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, we promote their rights. We have the Children Act of 2022 defines them. We have the Persons Deprived of Liberty Act that says intersex persons should be treated differently. But when it comes to the issue of ownership of property, I don't see whether there is a big deal there, where they would ask your gender before you purchase land and property. But I know they face a series of discrimination by virtue of their physical or any other difference. So for intersex, I know there's the acceptance within the Kenyan community because they consider its birth. Against a very emotive discussion, I don't want to get there, but I know as a country on issues around intersex, the government is doing a lot. There was census that was carried out in our last census. So there's been a lot of advocacy in terms of ensuring that they are recognized and they are given rights. They are able to achieve their rights so that they are able to then meet their full potential.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Favor, do you think technology can be an enabler when it comes to this issue of gender, or just looking at the third gender, and whether persons who identify in one way or the other than the norm, have benefited from the use of technology?
Yes, I think the answer is both yes and no. The idea of the internet, cyber idealism and utopia, and the founding ideas of the internet was that the whole point of the internet is for people to be able to achieve dreams and objectives that their geographical locations, for instance, prevents them from achieving. There's this popular comic by the New York Times that says, on the internet, no one knows you are a dog. It's a picture of two dogs looking at the computer and saying to themselves, on the internet, nobody knows you are a dog. And it's the most popular, it's the most reshared New York Times comic. And the idea there is that even dogs can be humans online. But now when I talk about it, it's very derogatory in a way. But the whole point of the internet is that when you go online, when you use these spaces, you are supposed to be able to it's supposed to facilitate self-actualization. If I identify, if I'm a trans woman or a trans man, I should be able to project my desired identity on these spaces. And I suppose to a great extent, the internet does allow people to do this. In fact, there are many people who pretend to be who aren't really actually trans people or non-binary people, who claim to be there's a lot of, suppose it's the sort of reason why you have people who are what's it called? Catfishes, for instance, who pretend to be something other than what they are to pursue romance liaisons or scams online. But on the other hand, I suppose normative values also shape what you can actually do on these spaces. I think that there is something called an authenticity ideal that permeates the internet. And so you'd find in countries like the UK, for instance, the government is trying to pass, or I think it has passed the Online Safety Act. And part of why it took so long for the law to be passed was that they were considering provisions that would require people to register for social media platforms using their real ID cards, for instance. And so if you are in a country like Nigeria, for instance, where a popular celebrity, Bobrisky, has been imprisoned for spraying money, although everybody knows that it's not because he was spraying money at a party, it's because they identify as female online. And if you do identify, if you are trans or non-binary and you upload an ID card, for instance, that doesn't match this identity, then inevitably you are opening yourself to potential discrimination from the government or from well, if it's a state-owned social media company, or even if it's if it's a big tech company, you are potentially opening up yourself to also cybercrime. If there are cybersecurity breaches, for instance, your identity could be revealed, and this could put you at a lot of risk because there are lots of cybersecurity risks on these platforms. So while there is the potential on this basis for people to present themselves however they wish, there are still very real security risks that translate from online to offline spaces, and from offline spaces to online spaces. That would mean that these platforms are still unsafe. And then finally, another very simple way you can see this is when you want to sign up and there are only options for male and female, for instance. Then if you don't identify as male or female, if you describe yourself as non-binary, then how do you choose? What do you choose to present yourself as? And there are conversations about how this is discriminatory and a form of violence itself, but it's also a way that shows that technology platforms are designed by people who have their own values and beliefs, and this often conflicts with those of minority groups as well.
Okay, thank you. Lengiwe, I'm coming back to you on this issue that you were discussing. I cut you short and you are going to tell us about the emerging trends in advancing gender rights in Africa with digital inclusion. Could you please just address us on that? What are the emerging trends and what does the future look like?
Thank you. Let me just go through what I had very quickly. I think as we noted, myself and Favor, issues around digital illiteracy. One of the trends or future directions that are being taken and could also be improved around digital education and literacy, and this could be done in a lot of innovative ways. Also using digital tools for accessing services, particularly if you're looking at women, access to health information, whether it's access to education, but with being very intentional about targeting remote areas or underserved areas, but also looking at groups that are marginalized or vulnerable, such as persons with disabilities, such as indigenous communities as well, such as others. And then also, if we are going to increase emphasis on digital literacy programs, these have to be tailored specifically for women, and this is very important to consider. But the literacy programs should not just focus on just those basic digital skills, but they should also include advanced training such as coding, data analytics, digital entrepreneurship, beyond just being able to use a device at a basic level. We have also been talking about issues of bias, issues of underrepresentation, and one of the issues or important initiatives that should be undertaken is continuing to promote STEM education among girls and young women, particularly at a very early age, so that it's inherent in them that they are also part of the digital tech space as well. And addressing issues around affordability. It's very important because this is one of the main or major barriers when it comes to accessing the internet or accessing devices or technologies. I think there should be initiatives that specifically look into rural or underserved communities, and maybe at policy level as well, issues around the cost of assistive devices for persons with disabilities is also also very one of these conversations that we have not actively looked into as a continent, and hence persons with disabilities find themselves left behind because of the prohibitive costs. And for communities, especially those underserved communities, initiatives such as community Wi-Fi networks, or those mobile access programs, or partnerships that can be done with telecommunication companies can also help increase access to digital tools for women and girls, and hammering very hard on issues of digital financial inclusion, because like I mentioned earlier, the exclusion of women in the digital economy. So using women should be equipped to use digital financial services such as digital banking or mobile money. In some countries like Kenya, this has become very basic, that everyone has M-Pesa, but it's not every area or every country that has significantly embraced some of these services. And I think a lot of advocacy work needs to go into issues of existing online, peacefully or without perpetuating biases, without perpetuating violence online. There's a lot of violence that is taking place against women online in different forms, whether it's stalking or bullying, non-consensual sharing of intimate images is taking place. And like our colleagues have been addressing issues around the law, and I think that's one of the initiatives that has to be undertaken, issues around the legal and policy framework of addressing gender-based violence online. And many laws on the continent are still very silent around the issues of, gender-based violence online. And, countries such as, I think, Kenya, South Africa, its cyber crime law has this very specific provision on non-consensual sharing of intimate images being a crime, and the same as Botswana as well. So there is that. As much as you have a Gender-Based Violence Act, in this upcoming or emerging legislation, such as your computer crimes legislation, there is that intentionality in some jurisdictions to include issues of stalking, online violence, and other technology perpetrated crimes. So I think it's very important to include issues of tech and advance them in the legislative framework. When we look at regionally, I like the stance that was taken by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. I think it's last year, or it's in 2022, when the African Commission adopted a resolution on technology perpetrated violence on the continent, and the need to undertake, whether it's advocacy, whether it's legal reform, and other measures to address issues of violence online. So that is happening at a regional level. And we've also seen such bodies as the Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child also being very active around issue of digital rights of children, where we are also experiencing violence against children, including the girl child online, that are targeted by predators, and they're being exposed to explicit sexual content and all manner of issues. So there are different approaches that can be taken really in ensuring digital inclusion, and also taking advantage of the opportunities that come with the digital space. But also being very mindful that in as much as there are advantages in the digital space, there are also a lot of pitfalls, digital pitfalls there, which should be effectively addressed using a multi-stakeholder approach based on where you are, whether you are a lawyer, whether you are an academic, or a civil society organization, or in the government or human rights commissions, data protection authorities. There is space for everybody to address issues of inclusion, address issues of violence online, just depending on the expertise that you have. And the media as well is a very important stakeholder in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask each of you one last question, and it's going to be the same question. Maybe Jackie and Christine will share this particular question. How do you feel when it comes to the issue of access to justice? Because now we're talking about, we're talking about technology, and we're talking about AI. We're talking about our context in Africa. And when it comes to access to justice, just for the common person, how realistic is it from a gender perspective? Who is more likely to benefit? What's your experience with access to justice using technology for us in our African context? And I can start with Favor, and then we'll go to Christine, Lengiwe, and come back to Jacqueline. Favor.
Thank you, Maria. Please, could you repeat the question?
I'm talking about the realistic, the reality on the ground, and this is echoed from a question that's also in the chat group. Excuse me. About the realistic approach to access to justice using technology and its application in Africa, in our contexts. How realistic is it? How widely available is technology when we're looking at, when we're looking at gender rights and navigating in Africa? Is technology accessible widely, and how realistic is it? And think about what Lengiwe is saying about the future, or what's happening already.
Thank you. I think that in many ways, technology already is aiding people to access justice. When it comes to advocating for the removal of a child who was caught on video by a neighbor being abused by a parent or a step-parent or some other adults, or child abuse in schools, for instance, on social media, the outcry that usually accompanies these videos sometimes tends to stimulate government agencies to do their job and get some safety and justice for and get the accused persons prosecuted, at least. But in many ways, I think also that technological companies themselves possess an element of hegemony over the way, over the justice systems, and not just justice systems, the justice system, but also many other systems that form a part of government and governance, for instance. And so when the government, for instance, chooses to focus on taxing social media use, for instance, or taxing social media companies rather than strengthening freedom of speech, for instance, or when governments pass laws like the cybercrime law, ostensibly to prevent cybercrime, online fraud, but then uses such a law to prosecute journalists or social critics, then we're talking about ways in which technologies are being misused by government agencies who are supposed to work with technological companies and work with available technologies to provide justice and deliver the appropriate services. Then finally, I suppose I want to speak to something else, which is related to within legal theory, there's the concept of code as law, and code as law refers to how when you come to a particular technological platform to use it, you are essentially engaging with a type of legal system, because you can compare a law, for instance, to an online a computer language. The protocols that you are expected to comply with on these platforms have been decided by somebody. But in contrast with legal systems, with laws that have been passed by people that have been voted in, nobody voted for Twitter or Facebook or any of the computer scientists there to build these platforms the way they have. And so we are essentially subjecting ourselves to alien jurisdictions on these platforms. And so I think that there is a huge gap in justice delivery, because in many ways we are transitioning from our own local legal jurisdictions to alien jurisdictions, and there needs to be a way through which we bridge that gap and engage, begin to view technological platforms as spaces that can be brought in line with our local legislations to facilitate sort of justice that we want to see on these platforms.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Christine, what's your view?
Thank you so much, Chair. For me, definitely, I would say that technology has been an enabler in access to justice. And for the case of Kenya, for instance, this was very prominent during the COVID period and the lockdown. We did see that the wheels of justice kept moving despite the lockdown, despite lack of physical access, but the shift to online platforms and adopting technology enabled the justice system and actors and justice users to be able to access those services, even with limitations. And of interest to me, I think there was a study done by one of our partners, Crew, that showed that, for instance, the GBV survivors, with the shift of to online courts, really appreciated that they found it more accommodating. They were more relaxed. The fact that you don't have to see the perpetrator on the other side and relieve the trauma, and therefore better outcomes in terms of their cases. So for me, I found it very interesting in that aspect. But also just noting that with the support of various development partners, the judiciary has really enhanced technology and in terms of case management and running of the courts, issues of voice distortion to protect, I think, witnesses. For instance, we find the investigators adopting various advanced methodology for collection and preservation of evidence and presenting this. So all this together has really enabled and enhanced access to justice. But I have a caveat that even as we adopt technology, I think we need to be aware of the gender digital divide and the rural-urban digital divide, right? The technology and the advancements should take into place various different issues of accessibility, be it in terms of disabilities, are they responsive? And also how simplified are they that even my grandmother in Siaya is able, for instance, to log on, even ourselves at this level, at times you're in a platform and you're struggling. So such kind of issues should be taken into account even as we move to the technological world. So just that gender digital divide and rural-urban divide. But generally, I think for so far, it's been good, it's positive. The online filing, the case management systems, the online courts, and all the other platforms that even the other justice actors, not even the judiciary, the ODPP have a platform and so forth. So in summary, I would say it's been a very positive trend.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Lengiwe, what's your view on this in terms of accessibility given our African context?
Yeah. In as much as indeed, there are advantages, in terms of access to justice and the use of technology in our African context, we are still playing, the catch-up role, especially in light of the challenges that I alluded to earlier, the issues of the digital divide, issues of the cost, issues of inclusion as well. And I remember, I think it was 2 years ago or so, I attended a symposium of chief justices, it was in Nairobi. And the chief justices were very happy to report that they are digitizing the court systems, and using technology and all that. But when it came to issues of cyber security, of protecting those court systems as well, I think there was a gap in that area, and I found it very problematic or concerning that, here we are celebrating that, in some jurisdictions this is being achieved, but being also not taking intentional approaches to addressing issues of cybersecurity, and that probably it hasn't happened before, but issues of the vulnerability of the court systems that are being digitized, I don't think they are being adequately addressed. And there are also some issues that I found, quite essential for us to address, issues such as, the capacity building of the judicial officers. I think that is very important. In some countries, you might find that probably they have advanced, but in most African countries, there is still a lot of capacity building to be done as we introduce technology into the criminal justice system. Also, going to issues of probably reporting cases, I think one of the speakers mentioned issues of around knowledge, that if you are reporting probably a cybercrime, does even the investigating officer or just the police officer understand what you are reporting? If you are going to report issues of non-consensual sharing of intimate images or cyber stalking or cyber bullying, have we equipped our law enforcement agencies to the extent that they are up to date or they have moved with technology? So I think there are those gaps that exist, but we could do a lot in terms of access to justice and using the technologies.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We'll finalize with with Jackie.
Thank you, Maria. I don't want to repeat. I do agree with what the other speakers have stated, but
Yes.
allow me to just indicate that on issues of accessibility, we still have a problem when it comes to the brick and mortar courts. So it is easier to then access courts through the online platform as opposed to traveling miles and miles to access these services. The other bit is on the issue of AI and decisional independence of a judge or a magistrate. So I think when we are embracing AI, let's focus the same towards issues such as transcription, but not taking away the decisional independence of the judge, because once you do that, then we'll be speaking another language. So I would again be against AI drafting decisions that should be left solely for a judge. The last bit is on open justice. Court proceedings must be done in an open manner where members of the public can critique. It's a transparency issue. So while we are also embracing the online courts, then we need to find a way of people just getting to know. You don't have to be a party to log in. So courts must then encourage the open justice. If we don't have open justice, then there's a likelihood then courts might operate in an untransparent manner. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Allow me to close our discussion here. We have overshot our time by more than half an hour, but I want to say that it has not been in vain. Christine, Hengiwe, Favor, and Jacqueline, you have been amazing speakers. We had a very good audience, very interactive from all over Africa. I was really happy to see the interaction today. And I must say that we have come up with, in terms of a summary, great presentations, which we are going to share with the participants through the Lawyers Hub. So nobody should worry about missing out on the material. There was a request to the Lawyers Hub whether we'd be able to issue certificates. That's something we're going to discuss internally and definitely think about. But I think we need a more like a masterclass. Given the kinds of responses we're getting from our participants, we need more time. I was particularly impressed by the presentations and the views, very different views, but they really made sense from a technological side when it comes to Favor, when she's looking at how we use technology to, report crimes and reach the authorities faster. And when you have people like Jacqueline talking about the courts and the case law, and Christine talking about her experience across Africa when it comes to the application of the laws across the jurisdiction. Lengiwe, of course, given a very fantastic background when it comes to the digital inclusion. So, ladies, thank you so much for being with us today. Your presentations will be shared with the participants. Your views on undertaking legal reforms, in Kenya and also across Africa is really important. That is something that really needs to be taken up. And of course, looking at policy, and we need to do more on gender-based violence, especially I liked the aspect of looking at because of technology, how gender-based violence now has transcended the physical space into the online realm, and how the policies that we can adopt across Africa to make sure that these crimes are actually addressed adequately. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. Anyone who was asking questions, I hope you've been fully answered. I know particularly there was a question about the rights of people with disability. I think they were touched on by both Jackie and Christine. So thank you very much. We have future engagements similar to this, and the next webinar will be on the 20th of June 2024. We invite you to join us when the invitation is circulated. Thank you to the Lawyers Hub, Louisa, everybody who's at Victor, everybody who's at the Lawyers Hub. Thank you to UNESCO for this partnership, and thank you to our panelists and participants. Nothing would be possible without any of you. Thank you very much. God bless you. We'll see you next time.